today we'll be pleased if we get beyond triumphal arches, because triumphal arches are used frequently and many places. I mentioned last time, just almost in passing, the one peculiarity is that scholars, archaeologists, Roman historians don't really know what they were for originally. Sometimes their location is over a regular road, so it's a passageway that people were supposed to go through. And sometimes it is a triumphal road, as in Rome. So returning armies in triumph would come through there. But were they to honor the person? Were they to celebrate a victory? Were they a statement of Roman power? It just seems to be available for many things. For example, on the Arch of Titus, the one that just is a model for so many subsequent triumphal arches, certainly not the first one made, but this one erected in Rome that is so well known, it really seems to have several functions. One of them, and an extremely important one, was that it was a monument to celebrate the fact that the Roman Senate had deified the Emperor Titus. As you could see, if you were standing directly under that arch, you could look up and see Titus being lifted heavenward on the back of an eagle. So Romans did not deify rulers. They didn't necessarily deify all of them, but that it had to be to the deceased figure. So this is something celebrating a man's career after his death. So it's not just for the triumph in his life. And then the inner relief panels did at least celebrate his historic achievements. One of them that's most notable for us now is his destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem and bringing back all the spoils to Rome, as you could see in this.
In case they tell you to come over or something? Yeah, I'll put it.
Cool. Someone still has the mic on.
Okay.
So that this would be, it sort of reproduces the kind
Not
of
just to work, Glenn.
Still someone has a mic on.
Me.
Okay, goodbye. So it could reproduce this sort of triumphal procession going into Rome, and certainly going through some kind of triumphal arch that you can see here. Then on the other side, it had panels that could not have a historical veracity because they included, well, the emperor in a chariot, as if it were part of this procession, but he was accompanied by personifications, non-human beings who embodied his special character. So it transcended any historical event. So that's where we were to start. And then what are some others? Well, they also take different forms. This is one in southeast France, in the city of Orange, where there are quite a few Roman ruins. And this is probably from around the time of the Emperor Augustus. It's no longer known what kind of sculpture there might have been at the top, and the inscription is gone. But what you can see is a battle scene up here, and then primarily just an exulting over conquest. That this is, the reliefs are well, there are a few ship's prows, those rams, the rostra, and all the different shields. Some places they have armor. I don't see armor here. This figure may represent one of those trophies. See that this is a style. It's just, oh, this doesn't look like Roman art. No, this would have been made by local artists. And so that was a 3-arched one. Or now you can travel down to Tunisia, to Leptis Magna. And here's one that was at the intersection of 2 streets in the center of the town of Leptis Magna. This is from the early 3rd century, and it's lined within by reliefs that tell the something about the exploits of the Roman emperor at that time. And this one, extremely close to my heart, because this is what I did my doctoral dissertation on. It's just a fragment of, this is less than half of what the original one was. It's in Salonika or Thessaloniki in northern Greece. There was a dome where we are now, and then there was a road going here, road intersecting the main road coming from Rome to Eastern territories, and then 2 other roads coming along the side. And it just swarmed with sculpture. When you look at your size here, there's an implicit, overwhelming message in this, which is that you are very small in relationship to the power of the emperor and of the whole empire. The reliefs of what's left, on this side, these were all battle reliefs, and on this side, it's better preserved. They're homely, but beware. Like this one, here's an emperor. This is called the Arch of Galerius, because that's the name of the emperor at the time. And he's fighting his great Persian enemy over here. He doesn't need to protect himself at all. He's just fully exposed. And you can see he's impaled his foe. And he already has a wreath over here that victory is coming to him. So it's a proclamation of his great power. And then down at the level, at our level, there was a whole series of victories and captives carrying things. And they were all going to the palace, as if we would all move ahead to the palace as well. So in its size and in the complexity originally, this would have been to just really subdue you by the, oh, no, maybe you would feel good to be part of an empire that was so grand, so wealthy, so victorious. You could imagine this from politics from any time, I suppose. When there is a lot of that kind of proclamation, it's often partly contrary to fact, because this was made at a time when the empire was dissolving under the force of so many tribes or peoples from all around, all borders of the empire trying to get into it, that for a while there were 4 men who were operating as if they were together, a single empire. So as their control is weakening, they have more and more insistent powers of their victoriousness. And one of that emperor, Galerius's successors, his immediate successor, was Constantine the Great. And this, if you've been to Rome, I know you have to have seen, since it is right next to the Colosseum. It's a very large, I think it's the largest actually Roman, complete anyway, triumphal arch. And it's also very elaborately decorated. And it's, much of this is just a conundrum to people. Let's see if well, wouldn't you know? I wanted to give you the whole long, overwhelming. I guess I couldn't bear it myself. the commentary inside this long inscription is it goes on and on about his prowess, his intelligence, his great victories, what he's brought to the Roman people. Now, to Western society, it is actually what he did that's very important. He managed to subdue his rivals and emerge as single emperor. And part of that is to military battles that are shown here. And then there's another layer of its significance, that before one of those battles against a man who actually had been ruler of the area of Rome, he had a dream. And in that dream, he saw an insignia, which is what would lead troops into battle. They'd know to follow their insignia. And it had Christ's monogram on it. So that was the stated occasion anyway, the reason for his converting to Christianity, which until then in Rome had been largely a persecuted religion. And that's a great shift in all of Western history. So it was that battle when his troops were led by the Christian insignia. That is one of the things celebrated here in the Arch, as well as it's being 10 years after he was ruled. Now, this whole thing, it's a concrete structure covered in brick and then covered in marble. So it's not as expensive as that looks, but oh, you look at all of this sculpture. I mean, this was made in 3 years, 312 to 315. How was this possible? Well, a lot of this sculpture wasn't done for him. And this is part of the puzzle this work presents. Here you see it. Sculpture everywhere. Up here, and I'll show you sections of this, there are on both sides 4 men with peaked caps, long cloaks, and trousers. Aha. When you see in Roman art a person wearing trousers, you know that person's not a Roman. And these are men from that area called Dacia, that's modern Romania, an area that had long been something the Romans coveted, and then they did conquer under Trajan. Constantine didn't do anything for the Dacians. This comes from a work of art done for about a century earlier, we don't know what work, for the Emperor Trajan. And then there are reliefs up here, which I will show you in a moment. They come from some other triumphal monument, presumably, for the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. And then there are circular reliefs sort of just pasted into the scene. These come from something for the Emperor Hadrian. Now, this is from some work for Trajan again, that and here. So you have successive emperors, Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius. And then you have works from the time of Constantine himself. What's going on here? We look up at the top ones. So the scenes here from Marcus Aurelius, and any of these, it's by the style, actually, that archaeologists are able to say, they can pinpoint, well, this has to be from this person's reign. I mean, carving changed enough, the way things were presented enough that I know this has to be Hadrian's time, this is earlier, etc. But in each of these, there's the emperor, and the faces are all recarved so that they are given the face of Constantine. But it's the emperor doing his traditional ceremonial duties. Here, an emperor would be at a moment of victory, addressing his chieftain, his main military leaders. You can see they have their insignia for their units back here. And here some captives are being introduced to him. So they both have a military theme to them. Then here again, he's addressing his troops. And here he's preparing to make a sacrifice to the gods and thanksgiving for their assistance. So they all have a military theme. Yeah, here's something from the time of Constantine. It's a victory just down below with one of those trophies. So, look at that leg. Look at that dismembered leg. I mean, how can that come from her hip? Very different from what looks up above. Then this also is from the time of Trajan. We won't look at that much. We're going to back up again. These are from the time of Hadrian. Whoops. And very, very plausible, three-dimensional kind of realism. Their sacrifices and hunting. Hadrian loved to hunt, as did many Middle Eastern rulers. You know, it's another way of expressing victory over the physical world. So here he has a stretched lion skin under him. But they look like figures who could move and live and have an ordinary existence. Whereas these poor creatures down by here, this is from the time of Constantine. And this would be every place down here where the head of Constantine would have been accessible. It's been removed by sometime in the Middle Ages, probably. Constantine, and he's addressing the public. And they would have been from these people receiving sort of gifts, sort of a beneficence from his victory and the spoils. He then rewards the people by giving them money. And there you get closer detail. Same thing on the other side. Here, this would have been the emperor standing on the rostrum, which we saw last time. Now, there are no ship's prows available here, but we know that's what this scene was. And these are portraits of other emperors. And then the crowd listening. There you see them. Now, who would look at this for art? My goodness. Not if you're concerned with aesthetic quality, but for curiosity, you certainly can. I used to have students look at this. If you look at these figures, these fellows who all have extraordinarily long arms and large heads, you'll find there aren't enough legs to go to all the bodies. And the arms sometimes float around, not related to anybody. And you have this very curious arrangement of heads all stacked up above this row as if they're on choir risers. So there's no longer any of that concern with the plausibility, three-dimensional reality. Or is it that no one could do any better? Is this the real decline in Roman art? Is this another sign of the collapse of the classical tradition? And this particular scene, this is just a fragment of one of those reliefs, and it shows at a historical event. It's when Constantine's troops laid siege to the city of Milan. And these are the city walls. And here's someone who's fallen from the city walls and falling to the ground. It'd be awfully easy to get over the walls if they're only that high, wouldn't it be? Or I will show you, this is a seemingly more chaotic event, as indeed it was, because it's Constantine's troops crossing the Tiber River in their final victory over the rival emperor. So they're pushing down the rivals here. So the question, if this is a grand triumphal monument, why do you have something from Trajan, from Hadrian, from Marcus Aurelius? Why isn't this all for Constantine? And we don't have any idea. I mean, plenty of ideas, but no certainty. would it be that the people in Rome at that time would say, oh, I recognize that. That's from what used to be from Marcus Aurelius. Oh, that was from something I knew from the time of Trajan. Possibly. Is it the way Constantine is trying to say, I am also a great emperor and a great conqueror like those men, and they were, even in their day, thought of as the greatest of the Roman emperors. So is he just declaring his allegiance with them and that he is sort of them returned? Are the scenes of current life just so abysmal because by this time there was nobody left in Rome who could carve? Is this just the collapse of the classical standards? Oh, we don't know. So it survives as a great issue. This one I also assume many of you have seen. That's the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, and now called the Place de Gaulle, but this is where great boulevards converge, or from here they radiate. This was started under Napoleon. So it's four-arched, but it was really largely, his designers are thinking of the Arch of Titus again. The Napoleon's idea, probably instantly, was to build this after the Battle of Austerlitz, when in 1805, he, through his very clever strategic thinking, led the French troops to victory over the Austrians and the Germans and the French and the British, and the Russians had to flee. So he really, his dominance becomes there. So his thought of the way to do it is well, you have to create a triumphal arch. And in the modern age, it has to be much larger than any Roman one, because his triumph is even greater. Well, this is a print taken from made a few years after the decision to create this, which is, well, the battle's 1805. This is already 1806, I think it was underway. And then Napoleon marries a woman Marie from Austria. And the arch was not yet erected. It was for something of this scale, and in immediately post-war times, you can imagine that even with the enthusiasm and the force of the emperor, it's not necessary it would be finished that soon. So his people created one out of fabric on a wooden frame, so that Napoleon and Marie Louise could proceed through it. So this is it were almost a staged triumphal arch. The arch itself didn't get finished until 1836 under a subsequent emperor, Louis Philippe. I have this print from them. And still, you can see people up here. It's not yet finished. But now the event changes for which is to be created. Well, first it was to celebrate the Battle of Austerlitz. Well, now under Louis Philippe, no, it's going to celebrate the victory of French troops really over what they considered a Spanish insurrection. And it was a French duke who led the French troops. I also want to bring this in so that you would be reminded of those victory rostra we saw last time, those rostral columns. It was not necessarily a naval victory, but this is Napoleon and the French when their total reverence for the Roman imperial past, that they wanted to recreate something like that and to outdo them. Then much more recently, well, you have, this is what it looked like in 2021. It was wrapped, just as you remember when the Central Park, Cristo put in all of those gateways. This is a posthumous project, but it's Cristo's idea, and it's with light blue fabric and red cords wrapping the whole arch. Now this is a sculpture that's underneath it. It's really just it's not part of the wall, it's against the wall, and this is certainly the most famous one. It's supposedly a kind of an allegorical representation of the French going off to fight in 1792. And you can see France is leading the way. And it's done in classical terms. It's called La Marseillaise. Or, I have to remember the names of the other ones. It's the Departure of the Volunteers. Then this one, the Triumph of 1810. Again, phrased in terms of Greek, and really more Greek than Roman art. Or the Resistance of 1814. This is so extraordinarily melodramatic. And Peace of 1815. So all the events are being recast in terms of allegory out of antiquity. Whereas now we look at something from the United States. I'm hoping some of you have seen it. It's in Hartford, and I'm going to have to go. I've been in Hartford, never saw this. And it's a Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Arch. It was dedicated in 1886 to the Hartford residents who fought in the Civil War and the 400 or so who died in the Civil War. This monument caused a lot of uproar in the press from the time of its construction. It was a local architect who designed this, and he designed Civil War memorials around quite a wide swath of the East Coast. But of course, the controversy is that this does not look like a Roman triumphal arch. It has a pointed arch, for heaven's sakes. Roman arches, they're always rounded arches. Although it is an arch flanked by a support on either side. But this is like Gothic. And these are like Gothic towers. So it's a fundamental substructure that's like a Roman arch, on top of which there's classical detail, made out of brownstone and terracotta rather than marble and brick. So it's actually very creative and very original. And that was not what some people wanted. They wanted something that infused Hartford and the loss of their townspeople with all the power and the majesty of the Roman Empire. In the US, I'm going to show you what, 3-4 arches now from the 1880s, 1890s. It's like, why in the US then? It was actually from something different, a memorial column. I came across a newspaper article soliciting people to provide funds for it, because these are not government-funded projects most of the time. It was a desire to emulate Europe, saying the United States now takes its place on the world stage. We are equals of Europe. We need what Europe had, which is triumphal arches, public civic monuments of great pride like that. Oh, there was also one quite literal-minded and amusing to me objection to this, saying, because they're the crossed arms of the different forces up here. He said, those weapons weren't even created at the time that something like medieval arch like this. So just not accepting that you could have a new and eclectic combination. Then here's the other soldier and sailors memorial that's in the Grand Army Plaza in Brooklyn. And this one was, let's see, 1889, 1892. Major architect of the time, Sanford White, designed this. And again, this was a commission, but not a really pulled together. It's not essentially a government commission. And a major sculptor of that time, namely Frederick MacMonnies, did the sculptural groups on this. In here, there are reliefs of Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses Grant on horseback. Because it's again a memorial to the Civil War. In retrospect, or subsequent anyway, thinking about this and the monument in Edgemont Park, which remember was 1825 for World War I. So there's a span of almost 20 years. Many of these Civil War monuments, there's also a lapse of almost a generation before the monuments go up. I'm sure there are both fiscal and psychological reasons for that, but it's just the pattern. So these down here represent, well, this is the sign that represents the Navy. They're really very fine bronzes. And at the top, there used to be a viewing platform up there, but now you can't go up there. This has the kind of elaborate symbolism that I imagine most people had to have explained to them, or still would need to have explained to them. It's not a quadriga, which is what you would expect in a Roman chariot as the Arch of Titus, with 4 horses pulling it and then the ruler within. Here, there's no ruler. This would be Victory herself with the symbolism of victory, and she's got her sword there. And then there are 2 other winged figures like Victories, trumpeting abroad peace. And the allegory is that they're removing the horses so that these horses will now be used for peacetime functions. So it's the shedding of the wartime imagery and moving into the period of peace. And the Washington Square Arch, which is from the same time and also designed by Sanford White. You can't really call a triumphal arch. There's really not much even in the way of weaponry shown here. There is victories up here, but it's to celebrate the centennial of George Washington's inauguration. So there are statues of George Washington down here. So this would be just an honorary arch. It doesn't have that exaltation over some in terms of some victory. There had been one on the site a few years earlier, erected, I don't know what it was made out of, but paid for by a private philanthropist. And that was so popular that then it was decided to replace it with this stone structure. There you see our president. And the last in this immediate series, this is called the Dewey Memorial Arch. And it was erected in Manhattan, and you cannot see it now because it was up there for less than a year. Admiral Dewey had, in the Spanish-American War, had cleared a blockade of Manila Bay. And for a while, he was absolutely lionized. There's a great column to him out in San Francisco, and that's where I saw from that monument the article saying, "We Americans now need something equivalent to what happens in Europe. You know, give your 5 cents, your $10, or whatever, so that we can build that." Well, Dewey's men had a parade in Manhattan when they came back, and this was built on, I think they just had a 2-month prior notice that this was going to happen, and it's made out essentially out of plaster. And you see again how much this is on the Arch of Titus as the mode, with little bits of Arch of Constantine, so that now you have Americans up here instead of Dacians. And there's a quadriga. It's too bad this doesn't exist now, because what the quadriga was doing was pulling a ship, since this had, after all, been a naval victory. Here you can see what it looked like. It was down by Madison Square Park. So that was the procession. So this great thirst for monuments, and the rush to construct them, and then you see it peters out. Dewey's fame faded as fast as it flared. So now we look at two very strange ones. What you're looking at here is Albert Speer's model for the city that was going to replace Berlin. This was Hitler's idea of building a world city, Germania, on the soil of Berlin. And Hitler had given Speer, even in the 1920s, kind of a rough sketch for what he wanted as a triumphal arch. It's going to be on the main, between two train stations, on a major artery along which would be the greatest monuments, greatest corporations, greatest works of, I don't know, government too. And this is what it was to look like. It was going to be, let's see, it's going to be 300 feet high. So that's about a quarter the height of the Empire State Building. And on it was going to be inscribed the names of 2 million World War I German casualties. And then there were going to be businesses within. So that is a monument of grandiosity, if ever there were. And Speer, being somewhat more level-headed, said, well, first what we have to do is see that the soil can support something like that. And if you go to Berlin now, there's like this great cylinder, concrete cylinder, which Speer, with the aid of French POWs, created, because they wanted to see how much subsidence in the soil there would be. Well, there was too much. So even if Hitler had created a world city here, that arch could never have been erected. But here's another very large one, larger than the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. This one we will never see anymore, I believe, than of course, we're never going to see the one in Berlin. This is in Pyongyang in North Korea. And it's as creative as the one in Hartford, because down below, it's based on the monuments, especially of the Arc de Triomphe, with the I'll show you one of these bronze groups, very much like the Arc de Triomphe. And up above, it looks like a Buddhist shrine with the 3 levels of the 3-level roof. The dates, 1925, 1945, I said it's to celebrate the Korean resistance to the Japanese, except the Koreans were resisting the Japanese even before 1925. It was in 1925 that Kim Il-sung got involved. So it's actually a monument to Kim Il-sung. And I read in the literature, the truly propaganda literature, these are all finely carved granite blocks. And there's 1 block for each year of Kim Il-sung's life. Within, there are conference rooms, supposedly, on multi-tiers, balconies, elevators. This is one of the reliefs. Okay, on to something. That's the end of the triumphal arches. So they're now almost monuments of megalomania, rather than that was probably a component of all of them, but now it's essentially that. I want to go back to Rome again and a little bit more about these tropea, but especially for the art produced in the time of Trajan, from which there comes another lineage of monuments. Remember those? This was that sarcophagus, just reflecting the reality that, especially in the 2nd century, warfare was a constant. And I mentioned, without really giving you any context last time, that, say, these Roman marble copies of lost bronze Greek originals of defeated warriors, both human and mythic and divine warriors. The reason that the Romans would be copying those, and for us to have any Roman copies of something, you know, it's highly unlikely that there would have been only 1 copy made and that survived, that they were made in enough number that there's a chance that they survive. So the Romans were making many copies of those because the Romans themselves are so actively engaged at the time with warfare with those same people. So these took on a completely Roman relevance, especially under Trajan. And I know today for the subsequent timeline, we'll probably be looking at just work for him. This is what a coin for him with one of those tropea, those trophies on the background, the tree adorned with weapons and armor of the defeated, here with generally weaponry at the base, sometimes with people instead. Trajan spent 5-6 years battling the Dacians. So that's the people of Romania. The Dacians wanted into Roman territory, but Trajan also wanted to expand the Roman Empire to include Romania. As you could tell from the name of the country, he did succeed because Romania is the Danube Delta, and it was very rich agricultural land, and there was also a great supply of gold. So the natural resources were coveted by the Romans. So he had 2 military campaigns there. Now, 101 to 102, and then just slightly later in the same decade. This is, you look at it, you say, oh, that can't be Roman. Of course not. It's a modern reconstruction of something in the Romanian city of Adamclisi, Adamclissi. And it's called, well, if you anglicize it, it'd just be called the Trajanic trophy, Tropaeum Traiani. It's a very strange monument. Well, actually, when it was found, it was mainly just a pile of stone down here and a few reliefs left of the original. But the shape, well, is of just a cylinder. Where would that come from? This is so pre-Hitler. This is nothing but related to that. The Emperor Augustus was buried in a cylindrical mausoleum. And this may also have possibly refer back to Marathon with that mound where the original trophy was. And then it was, we know, topped by a trophy. And then I will show you what's along here. Some of the panels of the original of these little panels are left. These you would call metope, metope. That's the name of this part on a Greek temple between the ends of the roof beams. This is actually from the modern model of the Parthenon that's in Nashville, Tennessee. So it would be like that. You see, it does have a separating panel like that. So it's vaguely classical. Roman temples did that too. But it's then, it's again one of those synthetic creative monuments because it's adapted to local taste. As rather than having architectural fragments here, you have really lovely decorative patterns, and grapevines become wolf heads. So there's that's definitely part of the barbarian tradition where life can spring out of something inanimate, and one kind of life, vegetal life, becomes animal life. And then here are a couple of original panels. A Roman soldier against two Dacian barbarians. So you see, this is made locally. Or Roman soldiers with their insignia. Now, what a contrast from that to something, again, if you've been to Rome, you know, the great column of for Trajan. Here seen in an early 17th century engraving, before the area had been excavated, this always stood. Originally, it was topped with a statue of Trajan. Now it's topped with a statue of St. Peter. And it's in the Forum built for Trajan. Forum is a civic center, and Trajan built it with the money and the spoils from that Dacian conquest. And it's a fabulous architecture. This is what the model looked like originally. All of this would have been part of that. The monument for Victor Emmanuel is now right over here. There were markets, there was a law court, there was a temple, there were colonnades where all kinds of business go in. You see, you're completely enclosed in a world made by Trajan or his great architect. And then back here, just projecting up the top, is the column of Trajan, which you now see here. It's almost 100 feet high. And it's covered with marble. It's the same marble that Michelangelo preferred. It's Carrara marble. Now, keep that in mind. That is marble that is brought from Tuscany. So getting the marble here is a feat. It's of 11 column drums, and I think they estimate this is well over, does this even make sense, 1,000 tons? Tremendous architectural achievement and engineering achievement to build the wooden cranes, to have those column drums, you'd have to have the whole ground here so reinforced to be even to contemplate constructing something like this. So here it is, you go through, you come to it, it's here, and it's between two libraries. I'll tell you why that matters in a moment here. This is imagining what it would have looked like, because one certainty is that you could never have seen everything that decorated it. Well, between the libraries, there might be a second story so that you could see it higher. And in a copy of it, I'll come back to that moment, in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where it's conveniently cut into two, you have a better chance of seeing what it is. All the way winding around here 23 times, there's the whole story of Trajan's battles and his troops, battles and victory over the Dacians. Something like 2,662 figures. Trajan appears 58 times, 155 scenes, lots of facts. There you see it. Now the base, covered with just trophies. You get an idea of the size. Trajan was buried in this. Now that was not the original plan, because it's really, Romans buried their dead outside city walls, but Trajan was such a great emperor that the Roman Senate voted him the privilege of having his ashes maintained here until the Middle Ages, when they were destroyed. And then you have the scenes. Let me see. Look at this. Maybe I went right away too much into that. So what's the conception here? Well, first of all, this is certainly triumph, the expense of this, the labor of this, the sheer engineering skills of the Romans in doing this are one part of the monument. And then this is if it's a scroll that's been unwound, because this is before there was such a thing as using folios, creating books. All manuscripts were maintained on scrolls. So it's as if a war illustrator who accompanied Trajan had drawn his scroll, came back, and then it was translated into stone. I'll show you several of those scenes. Battle begins with crossing the river Danube. And this is one of the few unreal elements in it. This is the personification of the river Danube with his wet and weedy hair locks. And the Romans crossed by creating a pontoon bridge, which was a great coup. The Dacians weren't expecting that. And there they go. They all have their kit with them and their insignia. And they leave a inhabited area in obviously a rocky landscape. So this is full of realistic details. The figures change in size, and you see them some from the side, some above, but they give you the sense of the place. Then at some point, here you see more figures. This is an episode where there's a cross in the water again. You see the river, and these are men rowing across. This would be Trajan addressing them. This is a copy of a section. And the verism of it includes the fact that you don't always fight. There was a lot of building camp and dismantling camp. So there's a lot of construction shown in these. Or more construction. Here's Trajan addressing his men. And they fight. See, trousers, that's a Dacian. It's very familiar kind of editorializing that goes on when you look at what I would say is regular features and the very different features very deep set eyes, broad mouth, broad set mouth here. They're making them look somewhat brutalized, dehumanized. Roman military historians can use these for and do use them for knowing about battle tactics, for weaponry. The Dacians lay siege to the Romans. Here with the battering ram. See, look at those faces. Somewhat caricatured. And here's Trajan addressing his troops. Always above them on a rostrum. Captive general is brought to him. Decapitated enemy are brought to him. And he celebrates a sacrifice to the gods in thanksgiving for his victory. And only in 2 places does someone superhuman appear in. Here, this is victory, and she writes on a shield inscribing the date of this great victory. So there was a realistic accounting of the battle, but how could anybody ever see it? But it's there. So in Rome, you can also see that a similar monument was made for the Emperor Marcus Aurelius about half a century later, when he went to war against a different Eastern European enemy. He's not buried under here, it's just the column. And it's as if something had been learned in that the relief there, see, they're starting out going across the pontoon bridge. It's a little bit more legible. The figures sort of stand out more. And now let's do that. Because last time also you asked, were these things painted? Well, of course they were. So that would have enhanced somewhat their being seen. We saw this detail. Look at this for a moment, and then we'll stop with this. And we're back to Paris, and we're back to the time of Napoleon, because in a square in Place Vendôme, VENDOME, he had erected there a column with a sequence of battles, his battles, on it, larger than what was for Trajan. And these were bronze plaques attached to the center. This was in place from around 1810 to 1870, when during the Franco-Prussian War in the Paris Commune, the people of Paris, in revolt against the Parisian government, which was not supporting them, tore this down. And then it was reconstructed. See, it looked very much like the column of Trajan. But now it's the exploits of Napoleon. There it was on the ground. This is why the painter Courbet had to leave Paris, because the government was going to say he had to pay for the whole reconstruction of that. Well, we will stop with that and pick up with the British counterpart. It's Nelson's column next time. As time is over. Again, if you have questions, you want me to go back to anything before I stop sharing the screen.
Well, thank you very much, Maggie.
You're welcome.
Your lectures are always wonderful.
Thank you. I looked at online at my last time. I so misspoke myself in the heat and humidity, but I'm reassured that it went by too fast for you to get it. Any questions about any of these or comments from seeing them? I think that one from Pyongyang, that really got me. It's like
Interesting.
just
And I'm sure it's still there.
I'll do the Western tradition. Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's his objective.
Yeah. So, that's sort of what I was saying in the beginning. These carry explicit messages, and then there's very implicit message in these too. Like think about how France, Napoleon, well, generally the culture in the 19th century is so oriented toward reverence for and desire to outdo the Roman Empire. Yeah. All right, we'll see what happens next week.
Yeah.
Have a good week and thank you very much.
Yes.
Keep cool.
Yeah.
Okay, goodbye.
Next week.
Bye-bye.